Good evening, everyone. My name is Tarina Harris. I am the Program Director for New Cultural Center, and I'm very excited to welcome you to join us for tonight's African American Read-In. The National African American Read-In was a groundbreaking effort to encourage communities to read together, centering African American books and authors. It was established in 1990 by the Black Caucus of the National Council of Teachers of English to make literacy a significant part of Black History Month. This initiative has reached more than 6 million participants around the world. And this week, I have the pleasure of introducing our author, Anthony Griffin, who will join us for a live reading followed by a Q&A. His published works include Black Cowboys of Texas and Speaking of Race, Speaking of Sex, and a number of works in progress, including Birds of Prey, My Representation of the Klan, and Other Unlikely Tales, as well as Syphilis Jones. He is a proud product of public school systems and attended schools in Fort Worth, Texas, Teague, Texas, and Baytown, and went to graduate school from the University of Houston, majoring in political science, to go on to earn a Juris Doctorate. Mr. Griffin's current career paths and interests include writing, both fiction and nonfiction, property development, and formation of a cooking concern. Learn more about Mr. Griffin by visiting the full event description on his Facebook page. And help me welcome tonight Mr. Anthony Griffin for tonight's African. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. My name is Anthony Griffin. I'm reading chapter 24 in Black Cowboys of Texas, edited by Sarah Massey, who's a good friend of mine. And my chapter was called Mac Williams Sr., Nobody's Fool. Her hair laid immaculately, its whiteness paid tribute to her years. She waited patiently, recognizing that she too would not be allowed to enter the church to pay her last tribute to Reverend Mac Williams. Her clothes were well tailored. She spoke to no one as she waited. Her eyes did likewise. A graceful willow tree framed her purposeful stance. The willow swayed as the Gulf water played a quiet refrain, from ashes to ash, ashes, dust to dust. The clouds slowed their pace, held their tears, but seemingly expressed their sorrow and respect none the same. The sky was gray, heavy, moist. I knew we all came for the same purpose, some with Jesus hanging on their necks, others with symbols of their employment. There were those whose appearance reflected the various stages of Reverend Mac's life and contributions: rangers, ranchers, preachers, priests, laborers, the children of laborers, and yes, old cowboys. I didn't know whether she had come because of Mac Williams' cowboy past, his former presidency of the Trivoli Lions Club, or his membership with the American Red Cross, the American Cancer Society, or because of his previous induction in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. Somehow, though, I knew that she too had laughed at his stories. I tried not to stare. I knew I wasn't doing a good job. I guess we all knew that because of the sheer number of those who came to pay tribute, that there would be little chance of entering the church. Our procession of patience was unavoidable. No house of faith was large enough in this South Texas town to accommodate our visit. I'm sure that those who were of the Catholic faith didn't object to this Baptist preacher, cowboy, park ranger lying in state in their chapter. Times danced, slowed ever so slightly. The front door of the church opened. She differed. Her hair was exceedingly black. She too wore black. She was at least 2 generations younger. They stood no more than 3 feet apart, of different races, ages, but they were part of the collective assembled on this April morning. As she exchanged hugs with those who were part of my observation room, the wind's gentle grace removed her hat and placed it on the sidewalk. I adjusted my weight from one foot to the other. The sun peaked and then escaped quietly behind its saddened brethren. The seabirds could be heard in the distance playing their song. We continued our pilgrimage. A quiet refrain, a tear, and hand of reassurance. Father, I stretch my hand to thee. We of different faiths and histories continue to wait. Times slow dance allowed me to revisit why I was in Trevoli, Texas. When I was asked to write a chapter on a black cowboy, living or otherwise, I said yes before I actually realized that I too was part of the unwritten history of the black cowboy. When I accepted, I knew that I was not a historian, but I appreciated history. Saying yes didn't mean I was professing to be a writer by trade, but the allure of the interplay of words and how words allowed us to taste, smell, and see that which was not present was what had always astonished me. Listen to the caller tell me how exciting the project would be caused my fear to manifest itself themselves on the hairs that covered my arms. I rubbed my arms slowly as if rubbing would persuade the hairs to lay flat and slay my fears. It was then I cradled the phone. When it was when I cradled the phone I realized I didn't know any black cowboys, mythological or otherwise. Sure, I knew folks who owned horses and participated in the urban trail rides, but I knew that wasn't what I was being asked to study, then write about. Appreciation, worry, and distress all created in intense fear as I cataloged my limited and rather humorous range of knowledge of the real or mythological West. Durango Kid? No. Roy Rogers? No. Hopalong Cassidy? No. John Wayne? Of course not. The often conflicting but defining words of historians, cultural commentators, entertainers, and television all conspired to increase my anxiety. As I cursed my own shortcomings, I knew my ignorance of the historically invisible didn't mean the black cowboy didn't exist. With my fear came my confusion, even though I knew the written and unwritten history of the urban workers with respect to those who toiled in rural urban workers of my father's generation. I had not made the same conscious connection with those who toiled in rural America. For every roadway, woolwork, or concrete monument attesting to the supposed greatness of others, built from the sweat of urban workers of color, I had ignored the cattle industry of Reverend Mack's grandfather, fathers, and his generation required laborers, cheap labor, and lots of it. I had not thought of any of this until the request to write. But even though the request brought fear and anxiety, it's also brought a sense of historical relief and a sense of purpose. The request was coupled with a plea of urgency. History sung is song. Quote, Reverend Mac Williams is ill. You should visit with him as soon as possible. End quote. Spring gently blew her reminder of an impending visit. The sun's dance increased its pace as if it were competing for our attention. Ironically, the rebirth brought by the season's change and the ever present energy of the sun did not erase my thought of impending death. Entering the hospital, I noticed that the sun's grace had robbed the hospital of its visitors, and the chairs longed for company. The floor's surface announced both our presence and path. I longed for a bridge between my anxiety and the anticipated interview. Do you know where I can find Reverend Mac Williams? I once read that ignoring the history of those who have been less visible can lead to pure and nearly eternal lies, even fatal lies. The words were those of Bill Moyers, a modern day historian. My text was actually a speech that Moyers had given. I knew that Moyers spoke I knew what Moyers spoke of when he spoke of pure and eternal lies of written and oral history. I remember in school questioning the voices of history that were fed to us and wondered whose voices were they actually hearing. I felt that some of what I was told was true, but the faces, hands, and bodies of my great grandparents, and parents were not seen, heard, or felt. I knew that some of what was being told was simply not true. As the tap, slide, tap, slide, tap dance of our feet played against the floor, I knew that history's call for a consistent truth was the reason I said yes so readily. Walking, I assume, causes the physiological expulsion of energy. I didn't anticipate it would cause my internal anxiety to continue its assault. My partner in this dance of anticipation was Sarah Massey with the Institute of Texas Cultures. Sarah had agreed to travel to Victoria from San Antonio to introduce me to, quote, my cowboy, end quote. I had traveled from Galveston. Sarah's interest was clear. Some time ago, Sarah had recorded Mac Williams' oral history for the Institute. Prior to our trip, I had read the transcript. I had studied the pictures of Buzzard Williams, Thornton Williams, Roy Williams, and Mac Williams. I had studied the videos, but despite visiting with my cowboy in these other mediums, I still needed to hear his voice. Also, for some reason, I needed to touch his hand. When the elevator door opened, I sincerely hoped the death would slow its march. Sarah's raspy voice punctuated the solitude of the hospital room. Reverend Mac, I want you to meet someone. The smell of death permeated the room. I remember the smell from childhood when I spent summers at my grandparents' Central Texas farm. The farm was also where I was able to observe my surroundings more closely. I learned that humans are no different than animals when death is impending. One summer, death visited my Mutchess extra bedroom quite often. Why Mutchess? Baby, they have come for prayer and comfort. I always remember that. They didn't die in a hospital. They didn't tie themselves to machines. They died in the room over where my grandparents slept. My cowboy moved slowly as the nurse raised his body. The taming of the wild was now just a fond remembrance. Although his voice was supple, his voice and supple skin belied his age, his physical condition, his cancer did not. His spirit, his laugh, his word conveyed a richness for life. He understood that I had come to interview him, to write about him, and learn more of his unwritten history as a Black cowboy. I'm sure others had intruded into his space to do likewise. I had seen him tell about the life of a cowboy on video. I had watched him disarm his audience with humor. I had seen him weave his tale in order to tell us about a life we didn't know, didn't fully appreciate, and in some sense may have found objectionable. In one particular story, he told of the relationships, marriage, and of men and women. With his straw hat tilted ever so slightly, he moved comfortably about the room. We got married. And about 2 months passed, I hadn't been to town. We didn't own much. We had a tackle box, a 2-burner old oil stove, and a 5-gallon lard can. We put our groceries in that. I made us a toolbox also. As I listened, the realness of his story was quite evident. Part of me understood that the description of poverty was not provided to seek our pity. To the contrary. One night I came in, I said, don't cook no supper tonight. I said, I just eat at the place. She said, I'll cook anyway. I'll eat with you. It was just two of us way out there. I told her that. I'm going to town with the boys. She said, what time you coming back? I said, about 10 o'clock. It was almost 7 miles to town, walking, down the dirt road. I didn't have no car or no kind, not even a Model T. So we went on down the road. We sung all the way there and sung all the way back. I told her that I would be back about 10. So we got there. I watched the audience, watched Reverend Mac. I saw the wood burning stove that used to heat my grandparents' small farmhouse. I smelled the biscuits cooked in the oven. I became the participant in his story. My father told me, now when we marry, you put your foot down. You're the boss of your house. I said, yes, sir. He said, don't give her an inch cause she take a mile. Yes, sir. You be the boss. I told him, yes, sir. He told me all this. You don't know when them's women, you marry one of them and they want to be bossing you and bring all the money home to them. I told him, all right. As he would say the refrain in reference to his father, Reverend Mac would whisper, we went down to town, 13 or 14 of us, cattle on the side looking at us, so finally we got to town. I got all screwed up with that sweet Lucy. We came back and walked to the house. I looked at the door and back up a little bit. Finally, I made it to the door, knocked. She said, who is that? I heard my father's voice, put your foot down. The audience moved forward as Reverend Mack whispered his father's misguided wisdom. The audience roared when he realized that his father's encouragement caused his words to become emboldened. I said, me. She came and turned that little latch. She had that Mother Hubbard lamp. A Mother Hubbard lamp hangs on the wall with a nail that has a reflector on the back of it. And I said, it's me. She opened the door. She said, where you been? He whispered, I heard that voice. Put your foot down. Where you been? Again, he raised his voice and explained. I said, about my business. She came up with that hand, pow, slapped me. He whispered again, put your foot down. He stared in the audience of the direction at the audience, smiled, and then increased his pace. We got together, man. We mixed up. She said, you wait. She takes that old a little old lamp, and put it on the dresser. And boy, we got back in turn at the house wrestling. So finally, I got her down on her knees, hands and knees. She was begging me. I mean, she actually begged me. She weighed 250 pounds, and I weighed 140. But she begged me. She stopped. She stopped, smiled again, and provided the most invariable punchline. You know what she was saying? You come out from under that bed, you coward, or what? He laughed. They laughed. I wondered to myself whether his humor and appreciation of life was forged from years of solitude on the range. He continued. We had one of those iron beds with the old-timey springs, and then I crawled up under the bed. After a while, she was in the bed, gripping, groaning, and the bed went down like this. Sprang all the way down. About 4 o'clock, I crawled out from under there and reached and grabbed there and got the latch and keys and went to work. The boy said, where you been? I said, I went to the house. And he told the audience that's what happened. The nurse lowered his body. She asked whether he could wait. Patisay. His body told another story at the time. His high cheekbones invoked the images of his grandmother, Fannie Williams, a Cherokee. His dark and supple skin, his height told of Isaiah Weathers, his mama's father, an African, a Watusi. I saw in his exceedingly thin frame his grandfather, Thornton, and his father, Buzzard. Although the voices of technology outside the hospital door forced us to remain in the present. His voice, his illness, his stories allowed us to straddle both worlds. He still gestured with his hand. He still told his story, but not with as much force. As we listened, Sarah and I, Miss Williams stood guard at the corner of the room. I'm sure she knew all of the stories about 62 years of marriage, but she didn't let on. He sang a song of both high and low. He sang his song. They were moved from one place to the other, first to the Butlers. They were sold to the Butlers. Then after they moved there, the Butlers sold them to the Thorntons. So after grandfather kept the name Thornton and his brothers kept the name Butlers, he killed a man everywhere he went. He didn't want to work. Reverend Mack chuckled when he mentioned that his great uncles being a belligerent slave. The audience joined in his laugh, and the last name we got was Williams. The audience joined in his laughter, and the last name we got was Williams. Then the O'Connors, they didn't name us. They just got us. We kept the name Williams, and they didn't name us O'Connor. I wish they hadn't. Maybe I could claim part of the land. I realized when listening to Reverend Mack that his words told an all-encompassing story. He allowed his audience to participate in the story. He used the language of his heritage and culture. He told the story from his perspective as a grandchild of a slave. He chuckled after wishing out loud about laying claim to the land. History song sometimes sings a different verse. The difference became more profound when I visited the words of the heirs to the land. The relationship between the rancher and their cowboys is also the result of the patron system, which is linked with feudalism, Latin American peonage, and Southern slavery. It was a system in which a large landowner would maintain a permanent workforce on his land. These workers were paid subsistence wages, but their needs and those of their families were taken care of from crib to grave. The owner provided for their housing, food, medical care, transportation, place of worship, and their children's education. Thus, the ranches became self-contained communities with generations after generations living and working together in the same place. I tried for years, almost on a daily basis, to get someone who had experienced the Patron system to criticize it. I was never successful, even though the interviewees were free to say whatever they choose. Chose. I understood the extreme pride of the land's heirs. History lore told them of Thomas O'Connor's arrival from Ireland to Texas in 1834, or his having fought in the Battle of San Jacinto, the youngest Texan to do so. When O'Connor died in 1887, he left a ranch to his children, who left it to their children, and so down the line. The late author James Baldwin explained the chasm best in a speech given in 1980. He probably understood what Reverend Mack was telling us. He told the same story in a different manner. Actually, we all know something very important that has brought me here. Let me try to spell it out for you again. And let me suggest the argument concerning Black history is one of the most dishonest arguments in the history of a spectacularly dishonest nation. I kid you not. I grew up in Harlem. I was a shoe boy. I scrubbed toilets and I can still cook. I was dealing with cops before I was 7 years old and sleeping in a basement before I was 10. Watching my mother, my father, my brothers, and my sisters in the land of the free and the home of the brave, living as though every day was going to be our last. Now, how exactly do you expect me to explain that, to describe to Greer Garson that when she comes to teach English, there is an irreducible gap between my teacher and my experience between my teacher and my education. I'll tell you something else, a very important matter. The language forged by Black people in this country, on this continent, as the choir just told you, got us from one place to another. We describe the auction block. We describe what is meant to be there. We survive what is meant to be torn from your mother, your father, your sister. We described it. We survived from we survived being described as mules. As best I could figure, he was a cowboy from birth. Reverend Mack described it as being born in the middle of a pasture. Quote, so I was born a cowboy, end quote. His daddy was a cowboy. His daddy was a cowboy. He was a cowboy. He spoke of Aunt Dovey, his Aunt Leona, Little Fanny, and Uncle Sam. He laughed when he spoke of his Uncle Jimmy. Quote, he wore women's shoes, real high heels. He was a character, end quote. He said his grandfather died in 1914, the same year that he was born. 4 generations of Butlers, Thorntons, Williams were products of slavery, of the Southern caste system, and an understanding that which was necessary for survival. His slow and deliberate movement continued. He explained that he worked in those pastures of love until 1945. When he tried to tell me some of the stories I had read, his slender hands would grab the rail and he would heave his chest. He would attempt to hide the pain. Somehow he would always laugh. Somehow I felt he wanted me to see the Woolworth buildings. Roy Rogers. As he talked, the light in the room seemed dimmer. Time slowed its dance. Reverend Mack continued to grip the rail lightly. Passe. He told me that we made 75 cents a day, but increased to $2.50 during the war. I knew he watched for my reaction. He laughed again and then expressed that a cowboy is a happy man. I understood what he meant and why he laughed, but I didn't tell him I understood. I asked him about his favorite horse. I asked him how many horses he worked at one time. He told me the story of a black cowboy's life as if he wanted me to avoid the eternal lie. I remember when I was a child, we spoke in the terms of he told me, she told me. I found that in my conversation with Reverend Mack, his words allowed me to relate in that sense. My, mine, yours, mama, daddy. Images of Lewis Wright, my mother's father, joined in our conversation. Mine, yours, much as Daddy Lewis. Dad Lewis also expressed his greatest pleasure was the smell, taste, and touch of nature. When Reverend Mac laughed, I saw Lewis Wright red sand skin instead of Reverend Mac's rich chocolate tones. They shared a mutual laugh. I truly believe the laugh spoke of their mutual mistress, Mother Nature. So when Reverend Mac told me of the buzzards attacking newborn calves, the Texas sky opened up and the rush of summer heat filled my nostrils. The gentle rock of a horse's back was felt as he led me to the buzzard's site. Sand cuts, sticker burrs, and the unbearable heat, little appreciated then, but appreciated now. Warm plums, ripe watermelons, the smell of livestock. Mother Nature captivated us with her dance, with her song, with her touch. Thank you, Reverend Mac. Thank you. The clouds at this time released some of her sorrows. She turned and looked skyward. Her eyes remained focused. Her hair retained its immaculate appearance. The wind played its quiet refrain. Its presence was felt. I knew that Reverend Mac was still smiling. He could no longer tell the nurse to wait. He could no longer watch over his herd. He could no longer brag about being the El Coyote Prieto. Coyotes could not rest assured that the black cowboy was no longer scheming their demise. Palisade no more. The church doors opened up again. And Ursula, first flushed with heat, immediately lowered her body to the steps. Her white dress fanned out. Fans of comfort were not far behind. One of the funeral attendants quickly moved a chair through the crowd, placed it under the grass, and held her to a higher position. At this time, she moved from her position and turned to walk away. The Ursula wiped her brow. She wiped her tears. I knew at this time that my cowboy's story was told by the precise presence of those of different hues, tongues, and attire. We were poor, wealthy, pampered, unfortunate, frightened, disenfranchised, and worthy. We were cowboys, vaqueros, cowmen, and ranchers. She with immaculate hair and she with exceedingly dark hair were part of his heritage. He wanted us to dispel the eternal lie. They sent me to this deal about 4 years ago to Cody, Wyoming, because they said there were not any black cowboys. I stepped up just when somebody said there are not any black cowboys. I hit the floor and said, "What? What there's about no black cowboys?" They said, "Come up here. You're supposed to be here. You're on this panel." I wanted to know whether there was any black cowboys. He said, "There were black cowboys ever since my grandfather got off the boat." And I want you to think about it, the black cowboys. You think the slave owners would have a bunch of blacks there and not put them to work on the horses? He wanted history to recognize the hours and hours of work and the generations and generations of those who survived. Somehow I knew that when the Lone Ranger heard his voice, silver in the air, reared his horse silver in the air, and sung his most familiar chant, Reverend Mac patted Blue Heaven on her flank and chuckled at history's song. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn, through the storms, through the night. Lead me on through the light. Take my hand, precious Lord. lead me home. And that's the story of Reverend Mac Williams.
I just realized that I had not unmuted myself. Thank you so much I really enjoyed listening to your reading. And I want to invite those who are watching us during our live stream, if you have any questions you'd like to share during the Q&A, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please feel free to ask those questions in the comments and we'll be able to see them. And then in the meantime, while we're waiting for that, I'd like to ask you a few questions, Mr. Griffin.
Sure.
My first being, could you share a bit about the process of writing Black Cowboys of Texas? It sounds like there are a lot of different, there was some collaboration of authors that went into it. And so if you could share that with me or with our viewers, that would be really wonderful.
I think that I spent more time worrying about it because I was contributing a chapter to a book. Mm-hmm. So you have to spend a lot of time worrying about it. And then when I saw Reverend Mac in maybe 2 or 3 videos. I had I forget her name, but she was the heir to the ranch, the O'Connor Ranch. Mm-hmm. And the O'Connor Ranch is the second largest ranch in Texas, outside of the Kings Ranch. And I think Sarah let it slip that she had written a book about the ranch. Mm-hmm. And I called to try to get a copy of the book. She wouldn't pick the phone up, nor would she. She had created her own publishing company down in Victoria, and she wouldn't give me a copy, nor could I buy a copy. Went online, couldn't buy it. I called the publishing company. They wouldn't. You know, she heard I was writing a chapter, and so I called a client of mine down in Victoria. I was coming out of Austin to San Antonio, and I called this. I forget his name, and I say, "Man, can you do me a favor? I'm coming through Victoria. Can you pick up this book?" And he's a good old boy. He drove a big old truck. He had a cowboy hat. He worked at the plants. He said, "Miss Griffin, I got it. I'm probably about 50 miles outside of Victoria." And we met in a parking lot, and he gave me the book. Oh, wow. I got the chapter, and I read it, her book, and I read it, and I became angrier because she called Black men, Black cowboys, and before that, slaves, fools on good horses. Mm-hmm. And I became angry, and I said, "How dare her?" And I put in my first footnote. I called my chapter Reverend Mac Williams, "Nobody's Fool." And I put in my chapter how insulting it was, to read the book. And I knew that that family was powerful. And I told Sarah they're not going to publish my chapter. And it was published by Texas A&M Press. And Texas A&M Press did what I thought they were going to do. They got on the phone. They called me. They called Sarah and told him he needs to take that out. And I said, "I'm not." Sarah came from San Antonio to Galveston, spent the day with me, and convinced me to edit the footnote, edit that one footnote. And I did. I edited. I still said the same thing, but I said it in different languages. And then the last decision I had to make, I could not let my bias become part of. I had to admit my bias. Mm-hmm. Because I'm talking about someone else, and I can't impose what a younger generation views of an elder. And I knew that he had been interviewed multiple times, and he had these stock answers. So to get him to talk outside of the stock answers, I asked him a child's questions. What is your favorite horse? And he talked about that horse. He talked about being on a range. He talked about the work and how it was hard work. And that's when the interview opened up. And I did what, I wasn't going to ask him, the same questions he's been asked 10,000 times. I asked him the questions that I would ask my grandfather, and I made, and so when I started writing it, I made sure I wrote it from Reverend Max Williams' perspective, his sense of humor, and told his stories. And I had to figure out, I had to be able to tell the story of a man on stage and being able to tell a joke and set the joke up and then have the audience go, "Oh no, you didn't do what you did." I had her on her knees. She was begging me, "Please, please, 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 come out from under the bed." She 240, I buck, but I'm 140. And I tried to tell that story. And then what I did to the book, the chapter, I added the footnotes to tell the larger story. So the footnotes to the chapter, which I did not read, has the academic part. It talks about black farmers and the loss of black farmers. It talked about more extensively Bill Moyers. It talked about uh, it gave the academic part of the discussion so that if I am reading it for purposes of research paper, I give you that data in terms of how Texas want to talk about affirmative action. If you were a white male, you got so many acres of land free. It's part of our history. And so the footnotes are me. The story is Reverend Matt. And I did not want to confuse the two, and that's how I executed the chapter.
It's really impressive. And you talk a bit about, just spending time worrying, about writing this chapter. Sue Johnson asks, like, what motivated you to write about this? And I think you've in some parts answered that, but if you could add on to
I was honored by Sarah Massey asking. Sarah was this gravelly voice, white female. Sarah died a few years ago. And Sarah is one of the reasons I just, decided to quit practice law and become a writer, to write. Sarah came to San Antonio and she was going to do a display for the Institute of Texas Culture. And that's a part of the University of Texas in San Antonio. And she said, I want to do a story on you. I said, what do you want to do? And she says, no, she didn't want to do. She had a display that she wanted to do of Texans, fascinating Texans. And I don't remember if there was 30 Texans. All I remember, I was next to Selena. So when you went to the display in San Antonio, it was Anthony Griffin and Selena. I was like, wow, I'm Anthony Griffin and Selena. Wow. I mean, that was my claim to fame. And, I thought Selena was a great singer. I thought she was absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous woman. And Anthony Griffin at the Fascinating Texan Award and Selena. And I didn't care about anybody else. And I did that for the Institute of Texas Cultures. And it was a display that traveled around Texas for school kids. And for a long time, it remained on as a permanent exhibit at the Institute. And we became friends. Sarah and I became friends. I visited her. She had a home down in Trivoli. It was Oswald, Auswell, Texas. And she would come to Galveston and visit with me. She stayed the night, and she wouldn't stay in a hotel. She would stay at my home. And she gave me, we shared books. We shared thoughts. She was older than I was. She grew up in North Dakota. When she was passing, she wanted me to go to one of the Indian tribes in Arizona and cover for her for a month. And I was to stay when I was quitting at the time. And she passed. And between me quitting practicing and trying to readjust, I didn't go to the Indian tribe and cover for Sarah that summer. And I forget what the kind of program it was and what I was supposed to be teaching. I was excited about going, but I remember out of deference to her death and stuff. And that's why I did it, because of some strange woman who showed up in my office out of nowhere and was bold enough to tell me, please stop practicing law and write. Please stop practicing law and get your book published. Please stop doing this and explore other talents. You've made your contribution. And it's that type of book where someone says, I think you can do it. And that's what we try to tell our kids and our grandkids. that you can do this. And what we keep ignoring is adults oftentimes need that push in terms of doing something. And she was that impetus. So I couldn't say no.
Like that. And I feel like a lot of times when people think about authors, there's like a tendency to want to put them in a box, like, oh, that's a poet, or that's a technical writer, or a novelist. But your background, like your writing topics, seem so diverse. Just like as I was reading through your resume, and I want to ask if you can share a bit about just kind of like when I look at your other works, like what were the catalysts to inspire those different directions?
Syphilis Jones is a fiction work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I had read a book years ago called The Dunces of the Confederacy. And great book, wonderful book. The author worked on it for years and died. Couldn't get a publisher to touch his work. His mom found his work and she read it
Mm-hmm.
and she said, "This needs to be published." And she went to a professor at Tulane University in New Orleans, shared it with the professor, and the professor loved his work, loved the book, and the book got published, and he was the first person posthumously to receive the Pulitzer Prize. Man's dead, gets the Pulitzer. A friend of mine turned me on that book. When I quit practicing, a friend of mine who used to work here as a lawyer sent me a book called The Short and Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, WAO, by Juno Diaz. Juno Diaz is Dominican, teaches at, I forget, one of the Northeastern prestigious institution, Ivy League school, and got in a little trouble when we were going the Me Too. He got in some trouble in terms of, but Diaz is a well-known author. Read it, loved it. It also received the Pulitzer. And I sent it back to Terry. She said, "Anthony, you did not have to send me back this book." I said, "Well, Terry, I gave you back your book."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, thank you for sending it to me. It's a great book. Did a good job." She says, I said, "He has an editor that trusts him." And she said, "Why do you say that?" I said, "Because that man has more sentences, that the sentences last a long paragraph. And his sentence would go like a paragraph. And I'm looking for the period. And I'm going, my, this sweet." And he does a good job of doing that. And I kept going, what wonderful writing, because not only is it punctually correct, but even when he's not punctually correct, it drives the story that a person goes, he's talking about a speaker, and the speaker just goes on and on and on and on without taking a break. And that's good writing. That can keep you where you're sitting there you with the speaker. But he did the same thing that he did that was done in Dunces of the Confederacy. He tells a story, an irreverent story, with a sense of humor, but still serious. So it makes you laugh. It makes you go, "Oh man, you ought to be ashamed of yourself." But it also is still serious. It tells a story. In Dunces, it tells the story of New Orleans and the smell and breath of New Orleans and the legal system in New Orleans. In Juno Diaz's story in the it tells the story of the Dominican Republic and growing up in the Dominican Republic, and it makes you live. And he does a wonderful job of writing about science fiction. I'm not often into science fiction, but you can tell he's at a level of science fiction that that it would take a lifetime to get at. Good writing. So I said, how do you tell this story from a Black perspective?
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to tell the story of a child named Syphilis Jones. And I had the child born in Washington, D.C. And I used D.C. as a backdrop because D.C. has educational institutions. It has Howard University. It has a number of Black institutions that are in that community. It has it has all those states where there's Black population, where you have families with degrees and masters and PhDs that from over the years living in the capital, in and around the capital.
Right.
And I have the mom tell the story. Well, the mom names the child syphilis after the U.S. government admitted that the Tuskegee uh, institution, it was during the Clinton administration that they admitted that they were experimenting on blacks down in Alabama, and they've been doing it for 3 decades. And I have her so angry and so upset that she names her child syphilis because she was going to, her position was, we grow up black and they know that we're black, but and calling this child syphilis makes him realize he has to fight every day of his life to achieve. And it allows me to talk about, we didn't have a last name. All our names were taken from us. We came out of slavery. There's a black males are dying left and right. And I tell that story both with humor. I have it told through an old man who had worked at the post office for a number of years, had a mental breakdown. And I also tell it through a teenager. So I have this old man and this teenager. And so it is totally fiction. It is totally irreverently. It is designed to make us think about why we don't have names. And, when you're Williams, you wasn't a Williams, when we were snatched from Africa, the heart of Africa, and brought to this country. You wasn't a Williams when we only had first names. Right. And did not have names until they had to they freed the slaves and they had to come up with last names. And we were grabbing names out of nowhere. And one of the things I realized, I didn't write about it, but one of the things that hit me, we should no longer criticize black folks, whatever name they give their child, simply because we came from an existence where we had no name. Mm-hmm. And so that's how Syphilis Jones got written. I can't tell you everything about it, because it's not copyrighted right now. And Birds of Prey was written because around the time I represented the Klan in 1993, I think it's 1990, 1993, I represented the Ku Klux Klan, and it caused a big stir in the country. I started writing because I wanted people to understand what I did for a living. I was losing the publicity war. People were bashing me all over the country. And I started writing, explaining who I was, and you shouldn't be shocked that I'm doing what I'm doing, because I believe in that your rights are my rights, and I don't care whether I hate you or don't hate you. I believe that people should have free speech rights and equal rights, and I don't care what your race, sex, national origin is, and that's why we represent the Klan. And so that book is called Birds of Prey, My Representation of the Klan and Other Unlikely Tales. And since I stopped practicing in 2014, I probably spent off and on a couple of years in Hollywood trying to negotiating the rights to that work. Mm-hmm. And it hadn't been successful yet for movie purposes, because I think I bring with me who I am. I was a lawyer for 37 years, and I'm not going to give you something away. I'm not going to give something away free. And I'm going to protect my rights. And what they do is they rely on the fact that, oh, he's poor lawyer. He quit practicing. We can just wait him out, and he's going to beg us to publish. And I'm going, no, you won't. I'll put that book is patented, copyrighted. If I should pass tomorrow, I'll somehow make sure my kids understand what copyright law means, and don't sell it for cheap. And the last one I've been working on one that deals with slave auction houses of Galveston. And I call them the mythical slave auction houses of Galveston. And what I do in that book is I start searching for them. And I found them. And, the Wall Street of the Southwest was really, it was, cotton when king slaves were. We made Galveston rich. And I can trace back names, addresses, streets, locations, places that we have signs up. There were slave auction houses there, and we don't tell that story. But I also felt it didn't do this community a service if I just tell that part of the story. I also try to tell the story of Black folks in this town from after slavery to maybe 1940, 1950. to show how we achieved and start locating some of the places that Black folks were. And I make some recommendations in the book. And I'm almost through with it. I I almost cut my finger off about 6 weeks ago, and so that sort of put me in a predicament where I didn't, couldn't type. And so I had stopped for the last 6 weeks, in terms of doing work. And but I'm almost through with it. So those be input, and I have some other projects in the works, but those are the ones that I'm a probably hired agent sometime soon to start pushing, and try to keep my confidence up that yes you can do this and yes you can do it, and I go through periods where I don't think I can do it, and I wonder why am I doing this, and then I go through periods where I have to pull back and listen to Sarah's voice saying, Anthony, don't stop worrying so much and go ahead and do it. And so that's what I'm doing.
I have one last question, and it's really about a big thing that I've been noticing hosting these read-ins is there's so many Black authors in Galveston that I had no idea about. And teaching, I mean, a lot of Nia's work focuses on strengthening literacy for our youth. And I really do believe that a large part of that is them having ownership over their voice and ownership of like origin of their identity and the things that are theirs and the things that belong to them, our birthright. And so my last question would be, what advice would you have to aspiring authors? And when I say that, I don't just mean our youth, like I also mean our youth, but people who maybe are going into that second career or people who just never felt like they see themselves as a writer. Like what advice would you give to those folks?
Recognize it's going to be lonely, because telling a story oftentimes is lonely. Your story gets trapped in your head, and you have to get it out. And the other thing I think is develop your own style. I'll tell the same story, and I don't know where I've seen this. I took a class in college at University of Houston, and it was called, I think it was called Black Public Speakers, something like that. It was and what the book was, it was taught around a book where it took maybe 10 authors, and it tracked their most famous speeches, and the author showed, and I don't remember who the author was, but he or she showed how I Have a Dream started off as a comment in a church. And then it started, and he had the drafts, and then it went from there to a labor strike, and he added something else. And then he told a similar story, but it sort of dwarfed and started developing until it became one of the most powerful speeches in history. And you sit there and go, wow, look at this. And so what I'll do is I may have told the same story. You have to keep pitching it and pitching it and pitching it and pitching it and pitching it till you get it to the point. Because remember, writing is different than public speaking. In public speaking, yes, you get up and give a speech, but if you really do give a wonderful job of giving a speech, you're not communicating on a level of writing. If you wrote, the worst speakers in the world are the ones who read a speech. Not a lot of people can do that well. And there is a speech. If you're doing a public policy speech, you better read it because you're going to make a mistake and you may affect a bunch of people. Yeah. But if you're doing a speech to an audience where it's persuasive in nature, to be able to give a wonderful public speech, you have to stop, become involved emotionally in the speech. Mm-hmm. You have to use pauses in your hands and voice inflection, because that's emotion. Right. That you have to let that emotion captivate you in the speech so that you can convey those thoughts that you have in your head to an audience who doesn't know you from Adam and be able to do it well. That's a speech. Good writing is error to write, throw away, write, draw a line, delete, draft 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 20, and you have a stack of documents like that on a 200-page manuscript.
Mm.
Really? And so be willing to spend the time, be willing to, and also somehow control your emotions. I have two fears, two weaknesses. And first weakness, I still suffer from what we as African American boys suffer from, that you're constantly told you can't do it.
Mm.
And you hear that from the time you're born, first step into school in the integrated setting. I was in segregated schools up until the 6th grade, but when I hit the 6th grade, they were constantly telling you couldn't do. And we did it also to our kids when we had segregated schools, because if you were the light-skinned kid, you were treated as if you were white. If you were the dark-skinned kid, you were treated as if you were dumb. And y'all can get mad at me for saying that, but that was my experience. And so my weakness is I protest against being treated that way, but if you get in my head, I start backing up.
Mm.
I can't do. And I don't let you see me cry, but I go into a hovel and I go, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this, I'm crazy. I've lost my mind. The second weakness is I'll work the project and work the project and work the project, but never submit it. So Syphilis Jones has been sitting on my desk for 2 years, completed, pretty much completed, except for an editor and except for copywriting. I sent it to Heber Taylor, who used to be the managing editor for the Galveston News, and Heber read it, and he said, "Anthony, please don't touch this again. Just send it out. It's wonderful, blah, 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 blah." And I still haven't gotten around to sending it out.
Wow.
And so when I die, my children are going to walk in here, and they're going to see probably 10 books. They're going to be in wonderful shape. I'm going to have them edited. I'm going to spend thousands of dollars having them edited, and they won't have been sent to anybody.
That is a gross injustice.
Yeah. And so don't do Anthony Griffin. Get the work done, work on a time schedule, and get it out and get it published. But that's the only advice I can have.
Mm.
Work on your head and work on your writing.
I really like that. I can't imagine any more solid advice than that, honestly. And I appreciate it. This is my first time meeting you. So, I just want to say it's a pleasure to meet you.
Well, thank you. Nice meeting you, and thank you for the invite.
My pleasure. And thank you for everything you've shared with us tonight. And it was really great. And so I welcome everyone to join us again tomorrow. We'll have another read-in with Dr. Kenyatta Loftus. If you're interested in purchasing the works or checking out the works that are available by Mr. Griffin, you can find that information on Mia's Facebook page. And I just want to again say thank you, Mr. Griffin, and wish everyone a good night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.